So this video is going to be looking at methods of training, which sort of athletes and sports each method of training applies to, and then the advantages and disadvantages of using this method of training. So these are the ones that we're going to look at on screen: plyometrics, circuit, continuous, weights, interval, and fartlek. Hopefully you remember some stuff about them, and we'll start to go through it. So continuous, this is steady training, exercising non-stop for around, well, at least 15 minutes. So steady training is working in your aerobic zone at 60 to 80% of your maximum heart rate. And this sort of training, continuous training, is suitable for the athletes you can see on the screen. So cyclists, long distance runners. So it's really good for endurance events, hence why it's over 20 minutes. And we'll look at the advantages over 15 or 20 minutes. We'll look at the advantages and disadvantages. So the advantages are it improves aerobic fitness, which is when we're working at 60 to 80% of our maximum heart rate, our cardiovascular fitness, and our muscular endurance. So it's targeting a few of the components of fitness, which is good. It's easy to monitor your work rate and add in progression. So you can see how hard you're working. When you're running, you'll be able to time how far you run and things like that. And then progression, you can up the mileage, you can up the amount of time you're exercising for. And you don't really need a lot of equipment. For example, if you're running, all you really need is a good pair of trainers. And then you can just go around, you can go run around the streets, around the park. So that's a good advantage of continuous training. However, there are some disadvantages. It doesn't develop other components of fitness that we've looked at. It's quite time consuming. Obviously it has to be over 15 minutes, so it's going to take you at least 15 minutes. And it can be quite repetitive and boring if you're constantly just running or just cycling. So they're the advantages and disadvantages. Next method is interval, where you work at high intensity, then you rest and repeat. So you can see on screen there's someone doing a sprint. So you might do a sprint, work really hard, sprint for 50 meters, and then you might have a 3-minute rest. Then you might do another sprint for 50 meters, then have a 3-minute rest. Now it's really, really important you rest, so then you can work at the high intensity again. Because if you sprinted 50 meters, then had 10 seconds rest, and did it again, you wouldn't actually be working at a high intensity because you would be so tired. So it's important to have the rest in between. That's why it's called interval, because you have an interval between periods of working at high intensity. Now this is really good for lots of team sports, especially like basketball, rugby, hockey, netball, football, where you kind of have intervals throughout the game. In rugby, when the ball goes off the pitch, when it's kicked out, when someone's taking a kick at the post, when there's a scrum, these are little breaks within the play. And then 2 minutes later you might be sprinting after a ball really quickly, then you get tackled, and then you go back to your position and you rest a bit more. Same in basketball, you sprint to the basket, you might score a layup, then you jog back and you get a little bit of rest between your next sprint to the basket. And similar with football, when the ball goes out for a throw-in, you can relax a bit, have you a little bit of rest. Then a player might come and take you on, go past you on the wing, you've got to sprint back and try and tackle them. If you're a striker, you might sprint around when the ball's with their defenders to put pressure on them, but when it gets back to your defenders, you just walk or jog. So these are really good. It's a really good type of training if you want to develop your fitness for team sports, invasion games. And these are the advantages and disadvantages. So what I've just mentioned, it develops both aerobic and anaerobic systems. So we know anaerobic systems is over 80% of our maximum heart rate, where we're not using our oxygen. And these can be, your interval training can be adapted for specific sports and helps develop other components of fitness. So if you are a netball player, you won't be sprinting quite as far as a football player might sprint. So you might do shorter distances with less rest and things like that. It's easy to monitor and progress. You can have progressions in easily for interval training. But it can be quite repetitive and boring. You're doing a high intensity period of exercise and then you've got to rest. It might be a bit repetitive to constantly keep doing that, and you might find it boring. and it might be quite hard to maintain work rate because you're working at such a high intensity. Even if you have the rest, over time you're obviously going to get tired, and you need a lot of motivation and a lot of energy to be able to do that. Next method of training we'll look at is Fartlek, and in Swedish this means speed play, and that's a good clue to what Fartlek training is. It means training over different terrain at different speeds. So different speeds, speed play, and that's how you can remember it's Fartlek. So for example, you might go running at the park and you might walk along the path, then you might jog up the hill, then you might sprint along the football pitch. So you're training at different speeds over different terrain. The park might have path, grass, a muddy bit, and if you're doing different speeds over these different terrains, that's you doing Fartlek training. So, one second. So Fartlek training is again suitable for similar sports to what interval training is suitable for, ones which change intensity all the time. So football, you're always changing your intensity. Like I said, if you're a striker and the defenders have got the ball on the other team, you might be sprinting between the defenders trying to get the ball. If it goes to the midfield, you might be running back to try and help out. But if it goes to the defence, you might start jogging or walking, and you're changing your speed constantly in a football match or a hockey match or basketball or rugby match. The intensity and the speed is constantly changing. So the advantages are: develops both aerobic and anaerobic systems, improves your cardiovascular fitness and your muscular endurance, and it can be adapted for sports and improves components of fitness. So what you could do is you could do fartlek training with a football. So you could jog with the football in and out of cones, then you might do a sprint to the box and then head the ball into the back of the net, then you might walk back to the halfway line, things like that. And then you can change it for your different sports and for the components of fitness. However, if you we live in London, we live in a city, it's good round here, but in central London you might find it quite hard to find incline, which means the land is going up, it's getting higher, like hills and things like that. And then the terrain is mainly concrete in central London. So an urban area like that, it might be hard to do fartlek training because you don't have the incline and decline, so hills going up and down, and you don't have different terrain. It might be hard to find any grass or a dirt track or anything like that to run on. It can be quite repetitive and boring, difficult to add progressions in, and it's hard to maintain a work rate because you're constantly changing intensity, and that's really tiring. So they're the advantages and disadvantages. Next thing to look at is circuit training. So the clue is in the name, performing a circuit of different exercises. So you perform it in a certain order, and each activity takes place at a station. So you might have a press-up station, then a sit-up station, then a skipping station, then a bicep curl station, then you might have a squat station, and then a plank station. So it's going around in a circuit, and you're doing a different activity at every different station. And you can design it to improve whichever component of fitness you want to. So if you wanted to improve speed, you could do lots of speed work in your circuit. You could do agility, you could add in coordination. Whatever you want, you can create the circuit to how you want it and adapt it to your sport. It's great for general fitness. So regardless of your sport, it's really good. But it's also really good to be able to adapt to include drills and skills. So it could be passing a football with a partner for 30 seconds, then you might be dribbling in and out of cones, then you might be doing kick-ups, then you might be doing high knees to get your legs working, and keep it all football related if you wanted to, or it could be all basketball related. You could be doing dribbling in and out of cones with a basketball, then you could be practicing single leg jumps for when you're going to do layups in basketball. So you can adapt it to how you want it to suit your sport, and that's one of what the advantages are. It can be adapted for sports. It develops both aerobic and anaerobic systems, and it's really easy to add progressions and monitor your work rate. So you can add in more stations, you can add in harder exercises, you can work for longer and rest for shorter periods of time. But it's a circuit. A lot of it will probably require equipment and space. You've got to be able to afford that equipment. You've got to be able to set it up. You've got to know how to use it. You've got to have the space to put it in. And it's really hard to do. Circuit training is tough work, so it's hard to maintain that work rate throughout it. Then we'll look at plyometrics, which is when you use the muscles and exert a maximum force in short periods of time, and this will help develop your speed and strength, thus developing your power. We know the equation there, power is speed times strength. When you do plyometrics, your muscle is lengthened, so it gets longer, then it becomes rapidly shorter, and this develops its explosivity. And if you look at the pictures and the example at the bottom, it says jumping, hopping, bounding, so really short, fast, explosive movements which will develop your power, your speed and strength. This is used by lots of different athletes in lots of different sports. In football, you might use it to do a sprint, to jump to head the ball. In basketball, to jump and make a block, or jump and do a layup. In volleyball, to jump and block a shot at the net, or to jump and smack the ball down. In tennis, to do short sprints from side to side, or to jump for a smash or serve. So it applies to lots of different sports. Anywhere where you use power in your sport, plyometrics can be used to train for that sport. So the advantages are very effective for developing power. It's brilliant to develop power, and it develops the explosive capability of the muscle. However, it can cause injury if the athlete is not in an excellent condition, because you're doing such an explosive movement, you're putting the muscle under a lot of stress. So if you're not very fit, or you get your technique wrong, you could easily injure yourself. So that's the disadvantage. Then finally, we'll look at weight or resistance training, which is a form of interval training that involves using weights as a resistance to your muscles. So lots of people can use this. You can use it to develop your power and strength, but also your muscular endurance. So people like in athletics, shot put, javelin, hammer, discus, they will do a lot of weight training. The rugby players who are in the scrum, where all the players are crouched down together holding onto each other, and they push each other to try and win the ball that's underneath them. In sprinting, they want to build their muscles up. So there's lots of sports where weight and resistance training can help. So the advantages are it improves muscular strength, of course, as well as endurance, and this also helps improve power, which is your speed and your strength. And it's got a formula of how you can use it to improve muscular endurance. You would use high reps but with a low weight, and if you wanted to improve your muscular strength, you can do low reps but with high weight. So you can see how it's adapted to target the component of fitness you want to target. You can monitor your work rate really easily, how heavy the weights you are lifting, how many reps you're doing, etc. But it requires specialist equipment. If you don't have a gym or the weights, you might struggle to do any weight or resistance training. If you don't know the correct techniques, if you haven't been coached or taught, you could cause serious injury to yourself. So they're the disadvantage. It's not accessible for everyone. And that's all the methods of training covered. So we've looked at what they are, who uses them in what sports, and then the advantages and disadvantages of each method of training. So hopefully that was helpful. Well done, guys.